La Niña is starting to come to an end, and taking a look at our spring outlook on this vernal equinox. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Wood. So we're wrapping up the winter season with that La Niña pattern that's been holding in place. It's been rather weak, but it's been pretty much playing out across the West Coast in this typical fashion, with a wetter than average winter for the Pacific Northwest through extreme Northern California, drier than average for Southern California. And you can see the statewide precipitation numbers are pretty much playing out again in that typical fashion. Extreme Northern California with some big precipitation numbers since October 1st, the beginning of the water year, whereas Southern California ending what was our wettest time of the year with below average numbers. So things are looking pretty bleak here in Southern California, Northern California, where our biggest water storage areas are. Pretty good shape. And now this is just a 1 year composition. When we take a look at the complete water profile, you'll see things look dramatically different than just sheer precipitation numbers. Our Sierra snow water equivalent is above average for the Northern Sierra. We've had a couple of March real big snowstorms coming on through, and those actually impacting the Central and Southern Sierra as well, bringing up those numbers. So we're starting to edge towards almost near average conditions for the Central and Southern Sierra. Again, the Northern Sierra over our average. Statewide, we're at 97% of average to date, putting that April 1st number, given that we're pretty close to April 1st, pretty much in the same situation, about 95% of average. That April 1st number, if you haven't joined us with these extended weather forecasts before, it's a really critical date because that's right about the point where we start to see less in the way of snowfall and more in this way of snow melt. It's kind of that date that water managers look at in terms of how much water we're going to be able to pull out of the Sierra snowpack. And that's exactly what that snow water equivalent is. If we were to melt off the snow, how much water would we be able to get? Again, we're heading out of that La Nina phase, and we're heading into what appears to be a neutral phase. What does that mean? Well, we take a look at the trade winds across the equatorial Pacific, and it's a cooler along the Central America coast, whereas the warmer conditions remain well out in the Pacific. So we have just basically a very neutral phase. Now, on the flip side of that, the one that gets the big headlines, El Nino. That's when the trade winds start to weaken and we get that warmer water really pressing against Central America. And what that does for North America is we have wetter than average conditions throughout much of Southern California through Central California, and warmer than average across the Pacific Northwest. What we just came out of was La Nina, the opposite, where we have strong trade winds. That cooler water really starts to expand across the equatorial Pacific all the way into parts of the Central Pacific here. And so what we have in North America, little reverse here. Drier than average conditions in Southern California, extending through parts of Central California. Wetter than average, we talked about this, in the Pacific Northwest through extreme Northern California. So again, we're kind of flipping things around a little bit here as we head towards the spring and even summer season, because it really looks like we're starting to enter into that territory of neutrality for our ENSO. As you can see here is a look at kind of the 3-month marks that we'll be chipping away at. And the darker red line is going to be indicating what all these weather models compile, and then we head into that neutral phase. Displaying that just a little bit differently here. I find this easier to look at personally with these bar graphs. As you can see, the neutral phase kind of playing into the most favorable approach here, where La Nina and El Nino not really playing a factor. However, I do think it's rather interesting. We could be right into another La Nina by the time we start our next rainy season, the next water year for California. So we could be playing a repeat situation into the next water year. We've got all of these types of weather explainers and forecasts on ABC 10 Plus. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you download that for free wherever you stream for free on TV. Again, that along with weather specials and series that we've talked about. A lot of California water. Now, spring started March 20th today at 2:01 in the morning. It's our vernal equinox. That's when the most direct rays of the sun is at the equator. Well, in the short term, spring is going to start off likely warmer, but it is also starting off likely wetter. We hit a little bit of a dry stretch here, but it looks like those kind of typical La Nina conditions are going to hang on a little bit longer here with wetter than average through the Pacific Northwest and extreme Northern California. Southern California likely drier, but we will start to see that transition into a more typical type of late spring changes that we start to see. Certainly heat illnesses, heat stroke, heat exhaustion. And then we look at precipitation, warmer storms, melting snow that leads to one of the main hazards in spring, flooding. We get the snow melt, and then we have these cold, fast water flows, very dangerous conditions on our waterways. Air quality, we switch from looking at PM 2.5 with smoke from people using their wood burning appliances into ozone. But we also look at seasonal allergies. And really, it's beautiful outside, but with all the agriculture and all the trees that we have in California, allergies is one thing that we have to deal with. And really, that's nationwide. I know it extends all the way to the East Coast as well. Let's take a look at some of those seasonal changes that we see. March 20th, that's typically around the date that we have that vernal equinox. We talked about the center of the sun. Rays are directly above the equator. So all areas receiving about 12 hours of daylight. That extends from the Arctic Circle to the Antarctic Circle. I always think of the folks that are at the North Pole, closer to the North Pole during the winter season, and think, oh, they must be rejoicing that they're finally starting to end that period of darkness and get into more daylight. And that heads us into the summer solstice. Now, the first day of summer is roughly around June 20th. That's when the center of the sun's rays are directly above the Tropic of Cancer. We get more daylight in the northern hemisphere, less daylight in the southern hemisphere. So you can see the rundown here, how the equator, still 12 hours of daylight. Arctic Circle, we're looking at 24 hours of daylight. And in opposition, the Antarctic Circle, no daylight hours, but shortly after that, we head into the autumnal equinox on roughly about September 20th. And the center of the sun's rays, again, are right back on the equator. So most every place on Earth is at about 12 hours of daylight. Then we head into the winter solstice, roughly about December 21st. The center of the sun's rays are roughly above the Tropic of Capricorn. And so we get the shorter days or less daylight in the northern hemisphere and then longer daylight in the southern hemisphere. I always love when we say shorter days and people say, no, it's actually still 24 hours. You're right. You're right. It's just daylight hours are going to vastly change here, where the Arctic Circle will right back to no hours of daylight. And then for the Antarctic Circle, we get the 24 hours of daylight. So again, we are heading into that transition phase. Now, the end of winter had a big blast of winter weather coming through Northern California. We had rain over the past 10 days, totaling anywhere from about an inch to almost 2 inches in Central California, right through the capital region here. One of the bigger periods was March 12th through the 13th, and then the 16th through the 17th. We actually had a couple tornado warnings, so some big cells coming on through. Snow over the past 10 days. This gave another big pulse of snow coming into the Sierra. You can see anywhere from about 45 to 75 plus inches of snow. Soda Springs, and nearly 80 inches of snow over the past 10 days. All of this going into a really healthy snowpack. When we look at our statewide, we talked about that average being about 95% or so. You can see how we're running pretty close to our average. We start off slow. We start to make those big gains. One of the biggest areas that we just kind of plateaued here was January. We started off with such robust numbers, and then January just flattened out. Thankfully, February and March have been big producers for snowpack, and that helps to get that free savings account, that frozen savings account of water to take us through the dry season, because once we get to that April 1st, you can see how we really start to fall off here, and that's why that April 1st number is so critical as well. Here's a look at how the snow surveys have played out this year. I mentioned we started off with those robust snow weather systems coming through, just driving up that statewide snowpack really quickly. So on January 2nd, the first snow survey was really promising. Then January hit, dry. We went down to 65% of average. And then the latest one to come in, 85% of average. Things are looking good again. If you're wondering what that picture is and Why that's displayed on the snow survey? That is the iconic snow tube that goes in at Phillips Station, goes down into the ground. Department of Water Resources, the California Department of Water Resources, then pulls that tube out. They assess it. What does the snowpack actually consist of? What's the weight? What's the water content within the snowpack that goes all the way deep into the ground, so they can get a better idea of what that snowpack all entails. So it's not just sheer numbers. They actually have to assess how that snow is actually kind of coming into its own. It could be really icy or it could be really fluffy, and we just don't have a lot of water content in it. So really, really cold storms don't necessarily have that Sierra cement that has that water content in it. Speaking of water, our water year so far for downtown Sacramento, this is the month that got us very concerned. In January, only about a ½ inch of rain. That tends to be historically our wettest month of the year. But we picked up steam in February, and certainly March has been a good one for us as well. Not much left over in the pipeline for March, but it does look like by the end of March, beginning of April, we're going to be right back at it. A warmer storm, and that will result in likely more snowmelt. But 50% of our annual precipitation comes in December, January, and February. That is in the rearview mirror. So now we're starting to look at our snowmelt, water starting to become at its highest demand. We start to draw on the monsoon and heat, and everything kind of comes together. So more pressure is on to get some of that water moving throughout the state. The way that this year has been playing out, we had those long duration atmospheric rivers come through Northern California at the end of November, December last year. Then January hit, we had those catastrophic Southern California fires. Dryness was growing. Drought concerns were starting to grow. Finally, February hit, and more of the state started to get access to some of those atmospheric rivers. As far as our average monthly rainfall, we, again, are in the rearview mirror for the wettest months of the year. March tends to be a wetter month. It's just not one of the top three. And then by April, things really start to drop off here. So we are holding on to everything that we can get. Even if the end of March, beginning of April turns around, that can help boost those numbers slightly. 30-year average is 19.2 inches for downtown Sacramento. We're well below that. But keep in mind, the past couple of years have been decent, if not well above average, meaning when we look at the entire portfolio, it's a lot more than just 1 year that makes up how we will survive through the drier part of the year when water is at its highest demand. And that's why I want to go into these major reservoir supply levels. As you can see, we're at about 100 to 120% of average. Our reservoirs, the biggest ones, Shasta and Oroville, are looking very healthy right now. 86% of capacity. Folsom's a smaller one. The reason I put that on, it feeds a lot of the capital region for Sacramento. It just happens to be slightly smaller, so they have to keep that a little bit lower because, again, we still have to prepare for the snow melt. This is where we hold all that snowmelt water. New Melones, Don Pedro, Millerton, again, looking a little bit on the drier side for Millerton, but still 92% of average. Not bad considering we had such a slow start to the Southern Sierra snowpack getting going. And then San Luis, that's an off-stream pumped reservoir. It allows water managers a little more flexibility. That'll feed right into the California aqueduct, by the way, that goes all the way into Southern California. So it's kind of this tenuous situation for a while, kind of, are we going to be wet? Are we going to be dry? Do we hold on to water? Do we have to release it for flood protection? And so this is where we stand for today. Again, preparing for that snow melt and the influx of the melting snow. Our current reservoir capacity that we're holding right now is 3.9 million acre feet for Lake Shasta. The total capacity is over 4.5 million acre feet. We'll compare that to Lake Oroville, the second largest reservoir in California. We're just shy of 3 million acre feet. The total capacity over 3.4 million acre feet. We'll see that peak right about the beginning of June, and then things will start to wind down again, and we'll see those reservoir levels going down as water comes into its highest demand. Plus, water managers have to prepare for the next rainy season. and wet season. Folsom, our capacity is 977,000 acre feet. Right now, we're at 680,000 acre feet. But again, we have a little ways to go before we get to those really, really healthy full reservoir capacity levels. As far as our average precipitation, I showed you this a moment ago, but what I didn't show you was July and August. So if you're not familiar with Northern California weather or California weather at that, you can see we really don't get any precipitation. We kind of shut the water hose off after June, and we don't turn it back on until almost the end of September, and realistically not till October. I mean, if you're talking 0.15 of an inch of rain, that is not going to be enough to do anything, not even put a dent in anything. And conversely, we see those temperatures going up. So our average highs are going to peak in July at 94.4 degrees. Whereas we start April at 73.6. So this is kind of where we're headed for the next season and beyond into summer. It's dry and it is hot. So we have to use what we have been able to get for our water supply. Our average first day of 80 degrees is March 28th, and it looks like we'll very much be right on target for that. First 90-degree day is May 2nd. Right behind that, first 95-degree day, May 21st and 100, June 5th, 105, July 2nd. There are years where we don't hit 105 degrees, but really 100 is almost a guarantee. So we're pretty much right on the cusp of seeing those really hot temperatures come into play. That also leads many of us to think about the drought monitor. Where are we sitting in terms of our water supply and drought conditions? We have seen a little bit of help coming in from those March storms. Last week, we saw that drought severity and coverage index at 134. We saw some improvements coming in or I should say that's what this week is. We saw some improvements for the Central Valley. So that was really nice to see a little bit of improvements from those March storms. Our drought outlook heading into the drier months, you can see it's very likely that we'll see drought persist, possibly a little bit of improvement here for the central part of the state, which is kind of nice to see as well. That's huge agricultural areas. So to see the fact that we might see a little bit of that improve over the next month or two would be some welcome news at that. When we look over the next 3 months, this is how things are shaping up as we head into spring. Likely warmer across much of California, except coastal communities, and also likely drier. So despite the fact we see those short-term gains potentially late March, early April, we're likely going to be heading into a drier scenario and warmer one as well. More snow melt, higher water flows, and cold water flows as well. Plus, we'll be looking at the potential for those heat illnesses and allergies as well.